Hello and welcome to Purely Academic, your potentially educational podcast. This is a bonus topic episode for July 2025. I'm Dr. Jonathan Lack. I write about movies, I teach cinema studies at the University of Colorado, and I also refuse to say it's clobbering time.
And I'm Sean Chapman, high school English teacher by day, otaku by night, and I'm just recovering from the psychological damage I had when I realized by looking at the Wikipedia page that the movie we're talking about today is the 37th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is just an absolute staggering number to be confronted with.
Yeah, that's... and I've seen all of them but one, which means I've seen 36 of these. That's too many. It's too many!
Yes, that is too many, but the one we're talking about today I think is pretty good.
I think it's pretty good. So today we are talking about the Fantastic Four First Steps, the latest MCU film, and obviously the first movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe regime to have the Fantastic Four in it, after Disney bought Fox in their path to world dominance. We obviously talked last month on our topic episode. We did a little Fantastic 4x4 where we talked about the other four extant Fantastic Four movies. I say extant because not all of them were released. But we talked about the 94 movie, the 05-07 movies, the Tim Story films, and then the 2015 Fant Four Stick. And now we have Fantastic Four First Steps, which I think is pretty easily the best of the Fantastic Four movies.
Oh, yes.
Although I'm a little torn on it because I greatly enjoyed my time with it. I thought it was a lot of fun. And then near the end, I started realizing it felt so light to me. I was kind of forgetting it while I was watching it. And I did end the movie wishing it had had a little more substance and heft. To be fair, that is a thing I've thought about pretty much every Marvel movie since like Thor Ragnarok. So... it's not an unusual problem, but that's kind of my reaction to it. I don't know what you thought, Sean.
Yeah, I think I'm broadly in the same space. I think the first two acts of the movie are really good, particularly like everything from the Silver Surfer showing up to the Fantastic Four returning to Earth. Like that's an incredible stretch. That's
a great part. Yeah,
it's so ridiculously good. And then I think in kind of classic superhero movie fashion, the third act lets it down. Like, this is not an uncommon problem, particularly with Marvel movies. But I do think, there's good stuff from there to the ending, but it just doesn't feel like it ever really comes together and ever really kind of commits all the way after that section. So it's a very good movie. It's easily the best Fantastic Four movie, but it's not like a great superhero movie, It's a very entertaining one that has some really remarkable stuff in it. I do really think that it's a really great kind of adaptation of the Fantastic Four. It's the first one to properly try to adapt the Fantastic Four's genre, which is very 50s, 60s sci-fi B-movie and kind of the style of that plot and that kind of stuff. It's the first time they've tried to really do that in a movie, and I think that stuff is really awesome, but I do wish that it kind of had more to do in the kind of the last section of the film.
It's the last section, but I do think it reflects on the whole structure of the movie. Because, I definitely think... I agree with you that I think it's kind of the second act kind of into end of the first. But, Silver Surfer arriving and their adventure out into space. And then, one of the best action scenes Marvel's ever done, which is the scene around the black hole where Sue Storm is giving birth. Great scene. And I think up to that point, it's a great introduction to the team and to this world. And then it feels like it's expanding the world because it's doing something we've, for some reason, never seen the Fantastic Four do, which is get in a ship and go explore the universe, which is their thing, right? And all the other movies are just they're chilling on Earth, basically. And so you have all of that, and it feels like the movie is taking you to new places and seeing you do new things and pushing the boundaries a little bit. And then the last act... I don't even think there's anything that wrong with it. It's well made, it's well acted. There's no plot problems in the sense of things are unresolved or none of that. But there's just a lack of ambition where the third act, Silver Surfer's plot goes the way you expect it to go. In fact, it's basically beat for beat what happened in Rise of the Silver Surfer, right? And Galactus's plot goes pretty much beat for beat where you expect it to go. And the characters end up, the last scene of the movie is a repeat of the first scene of the movie, and nothing has really changed. And there's just kind of this lack, there's a safety to it that with all the exciting, cool things the movie has going for it, I wanted a little bit more of the ambition and the sense that like we have this incredible new playground to experiment on. Let's go bold with it, and it ends up being fairly safe. So it's not a bad third act in the sense of like Iron Man has a bad third act where like the villain just falls apart and the action is terrible. But it's one where you feel like this movie, because it does so many things so well, and also like Superman came out 2 weeks ago and does way more on this kind of thing with the ambition of the world, and that's what I kind of wanted out of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for me, yeah, I think that that's a good assessment of that. It is like on a functional level, it works. Like it has good action. Like all that stuff is well made. It all fits together well. It's paced pretty well. Like it's not that kind of problem. I think it is more that like it kind of suggests really interesting themes with the sort of the contrast between the Galactus stuff and the birth of Franklin Richards and the like Reed and Sue becoming parents. And I think there's like a lot of really juicy material there that ends up they just kind of like don't fully commit to in that last act. And so that's why in that middle section it feels really powerful, not just because like the action is great and all that kind of stuff, but because it is juxtaposing these things together that are very suggestive and I think lead you to a potentially really great superhero movie if it fully committed to those things. But instead it kind of, it's there. Like, it's not like it sort of totally abandons the themes that it has, but it sort of quashes them a little bit and lets them just sort of simmer a little instead of really jumping into the deep end with it. And that's the thing that's disappointing about it to me.
Yeah, and I think where this is frustrating is that in a lot of ways, this is exactly the movie Marvel has needed. It's a fresh start. It has zero references to anything else in the MCU. It's well paced. It's not overstuffed. It looks great. It's got great production design. It's got practical sets. Even the CGI, I think, is generally very good, other than the baby. We'll talk about that later. That's fucking hilarious. But like, other than that, the CGI is good. I think like it's got a good soundtrack from Michael Giacchino. So a lot of it is much better than recent Marvel movies have been. But I think the wall it hits is the wall they've been hitting, which is that these movies at this point are so designed by committee. This movie has 5 credited screenwriters, and you can feel that. You can feel the committee kind of nature of it, where they don't kind of take the leap that you need to take to kind of follow through, because that kind of leap is risky. And it's not like Marvel has ever been a super risky company, but they did less than 10 years ago do Black Panther and Thor Ragnarok back to back. And those movies do follow through on their ideas. Thor Ragnarok ends with them destroying Valhalla. What is it? Not Valhalla. The
Asgard.
Asgard, yeah. And Black Panther ends with like a really direct acknowledgement of Killmonger's pain and T'Challa choosing to do something with it. And those movies have that follow through. And those are also notably movies made by like a single creative auteur. And I think Matt Shakman, the director of this one, is really, really good at a lot of comic booky stuff. When you compare this and WandaVision, like his sense of how to do comic book aesthetics in live action is kind of almost second to none at this. Like, he's really good within the MCU at least. But like that authorial touch, that like a Sam Raimi Spider-Man has, or a James Gunn superhero movie has, like that's where you want that kind of follow through. And I worry that Kevin Feige's Marvel regime just is so resistant to that this is like the ceiling of what they can do, and that's a bit of a bummer, because this could have been a really bold new start if they trusted themselves a little more.
Yeah, it's definitely that it lacks that extra little personal touch in a narrative sense. Like, I think you feel a personal touch in the setting, in the production design, in the way it's shot, all that kind of stuff. I think you feel this like, not necessarily like an auteur kind of thing, but this like really strong commitment and this vision that a whole team of people are very passionate about. Because I do feel a lot of passion from a lot of the elements of the movie. The one place I don't think you fully get that, though, is in the narrative, because of the way that it resolves and in the way that whole last act, again, is not terrible. And it's more that like, we have had 36 other movies in this model, and a lot more than that, really, because it's not just the Marvel Studios movies. They're like that. There are lots of superhero movies that are like this. And so there is, I think, a certain personal limit at which, for me, I feel like I just need something to go even further. And for me to like really fall in love with it, even though I did enjoy this movie tremendously, and I'm excited to talk about a lot of the elements of it because there are so many really great things about it. But it does hit that wall that it can't overcome, that something like for Marvel Black Panther or Thor Ragnarok very much do.
Yeah, and I think my reaction would be more positive and like forward looking if the next thing Marvel was doing wasn't Avengers Doomsday. Like that's the other thing.
Yeah.
If this was truly a fresh start and we knew and the future was a little less written and like we knew they were going in more unexpected directions, I'd say great first step. It's the title of the movie. We'll go on from here. But it's harder because the next thing they're doing is taking these characters and throwing them into a thoroughly broken version of the MCU. And I don't really need to see these characters interact with fucking the Thunderbolts. I would rather see Fantastic Four 2, but we'll see. We'll talk about that more later. Let's start, Sean, with let's compliment sandwich this thing and start with things we liked. And just the number one thing I want to say right off the bat, this has the best production design of any Marvel movie, like easily. Like I think Black Panther would be the second one, and I would say, if you're talking strictly costumes, Black Panther is the number one. But I think the overall design of the world, in part because it is so physical and tangible, and there's so many good like sets and props and even things that are CGI, I think are very well integrated. I really love the look of it. I love that they really like this choice that had to come very early in the process to say blue and white are the colors of the movie. They're the colors of the costumes. They're the colors of rooms. Everything is in some way related to the colors blue and white. And I love that kind of top-down, because it's exactly what you're saying. You can feel a real passion and an authorship to it, even whether that's from the production designer, director, probably a whole team effort. But this is not a someone else prevised the movie for Matt Shakman and then he came in and called action and cut. Like very clearly there was a real effort to make the movie look great, and it's that color design. It is the the futurism of it. What do you call it? The like retro-futurism?
Retro-futurism.
Retro-futurism, sorry. Black Panther is Afrofuturism,
yes.
So I've got these mixed up in my head. But yeah, this retro-futurism, like there's the moment where you see Reed Richards swapping out Herbie's programming, and he does it with a giant fucking like 8-track tape, and the 8-track tape creates Herbie's eyes. It's that kind of thing where I'm like, this fucking rocks. And it's just, correct me if you think I'm wrong, I think this is by far the most Marvel has ever engaged with comic book aesthetics in one of their movies, in terms of like trying to make it look like the texture and world of a comic book, and specifically like a specific era and run, and obviously the Jack Kirby artistry of it, who gets a dedication at the end of the movie. Like that is something that I don't think they've ever kind of broached before.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely like it's the most that anybody has really committed to trying to capture a certain Jack Kirby look. And it's not, perfect. Like, I do wish that there were more crackling energy blasts that people shot from their hands. If you've got fucking Silver Surfer around, maybe they're not ready to fully, walk that bridge and figure out how to do the Jack Kirby energy crackle on camera. But yeah, just the whole look and tone and style, both of the stuff on Earth with the 60s retrofuturism, which, very much captures that Fantastic Four energy, that feeling of like the Baxter Building being this vision of the future from the perspective of the early 1960s, which is awesome. And the design of the fucking rocket ship and all that stuff is really good. But then also all the stuff in space and like how they realize Galactus and the destruction of the planets and the kind of more far out there pseudo Lovecraftian kind of stuff that you get into is very Jack Kirby, including the elements in which it's kind of goofy because it's not Cthulhu, it's a giant man in like a big purple suit, which is part of the whole thing. Like, you got to do it. And yeah, that's part of my favorite thing of the movie, is that it does commit to trying to execute that kind of aesthetic with its own twist on it. They're not just trying to copy exactly the way those comics looked, because that wouldn't obviously make any kind of sense. But it is using that as this kind of starting base for which to kind of build out the entire aesthetic sense of the movie, and it's very committed to that aesthetic sense, and that's awesome. And there is just I'm excited to watch this movie again at some point, not entirely just because I want to see the story or whatever. I'm more excited just like I want to see it to focus on the background and stuff, because there is so much detail and so much love and care put into the sets and all of that, and there's a lot of inventiveness there. So I think that this movie would be a very like rewarding thing on a rewatch in that kind of sense of like admiring the production design and kind of putting the story stuff to the side. And that is a really cool accomplishment.
Yes, absolutely. And like again, Marvel movies have just looked so bland for so long, and they've famously eschewed any kind of location work. But even when they're on set, there's nothing wrong with shooting on a soundstage. But if you're shooting on a green screen or doing the LED walls that killed Thor Love and Thunder and that kind of stuff, and you're just not even building sets, like, they have such bland looks. I think this movie's visually still has a little bit of an issue with the color grade where I wish it popped a little more. And I'm not complaining about the coolness of the look, because it is a cool color tone. It's blue and white, and that's fine. But I do think, like, it needs more contrast. The image looks a little too flat. This is a problem all Marvel movies basically have, where the color grade is a little too flat, and it makes the image look aggressively two-dimensional. And I think you could make it pop a little more, and I would like to see that. And that's not even an on-set cinematography problem. That's a post-production color grade issue. But other than that, this movie looks great. I really love, like you say, just like kind of, this is a movie I would buy the art book for if they put one of those out, right? Like, I would love to see concept art. I'd love to see images of the sets. It's very clear that these characters are on, sets that have been built with costumes that have been designed to look good on those sets. Like, I know this sounds like a low bar to clear, but it's like, it really matters. And it's stuff that really does make the movie unique and just fun to watch. And I think there's a whole sense of tone that the movie gets right too. Like, I really, really enjoy the first scene of this movie. Well, the first scene is like the pregnancy test, but the big opening is the Ted Gilbert show where they do the Fantastic Four's backstory. This movie was after my own heart right away when they are replicating the original Apollo 11 footage for them, like, getting ready to go into space. And I've seen that footage. I'm such a huge like space flight nerd. I've seen that in a million forms, and so I really enjoyed seeing how they kind of matched that up. That was cool. But then, like, their whole backstory of the Fantastic Four, I love that this goes for, they've been around for 4 years already, and not just that, but here's a list of villains they've already fought. And they just go through, and they show some of the crazy, silly villains that couldn't have supported their own movie, but we get little, sizzle reel of, and you get, the Fantastic Four celebrities and all of that, the fun tone stuff. That just, like, it's very winning right off the bat, because it's clearly so happy to be doing this,
Yes, that was fun for me because my reference point for the Fantastic Four is the original Stan Lee's Jack Kirby books. Like, I never have really read a modern Fantastic Four, but I had like one of those giant omnibus books back in the day when I was like in 6th grade or something like that. And it was the kind of ones back then that they were just on really shitty paper quality, and it wasn't even in color. That was all in black and white. But you had like 50 fucking issues of Fantastic Four in this giant fucking phone book looking thing. And that's what I've read, and that is like my reference point for Fantastic Four. So when they show you a little tiny scene of them fighting a red ghost, the like genius orangutan, that like it does speak to me in a certain way of like, yes, like that to me is a Fantastic Four bad guy, is the like communist orangutan genius thing. Where back in the day, like when every comic book had to have some sort of like genius ape, whether there's Gorilla Grodd for the Flash or whatever. And I love that kind of just like era of the every other issue has to have a brand new villain. Many of them kind of like lost to time, because nowadays it's, everyone just recycles whatever like the popular villains were. And so it is very fun to just get your who's who of random one-off Fantastic Four bad guys. A lot of them you see in that montage, and then you also get that one scene where Reed, this is right before the Silver Surfer shows up, just like lists off the name of all these different criminals he's like coordinated an effort to, but they take it seriously in the appropriate way for the movie.
I mean, it's been clear in Marvel for a while that Kevin Feige and a lot of the Brain Trust have a real fondness for the era you're talking about. But they've never quite gone in headfirst like this. Like, I think Doctor Strange has some of it, obviously, and like some of the, usually more on a production design level than anything. But it is clear that they really have, I think, for a long time wanted to do something that is this much of a particularly Jack Kirby love letter. I mean, they named the Earth in this one after his birthday, 828, which they show at the end of the movie, which is sweet. But it is very fun to see them put all that in there and just, as you say, list all these villains. And it just, again, I wish this movie kind of went further with it at certain points. Like I did one of my problems with the third act is that the world feels very literally empty, because they've not only evacuated everyone, but it is just the four kind of interacting with each other. And that works well enough. But when, they bring the Mole Man back in, I wish it kind of made me think of the way, James Gunn's Superman, it just makes the world feel so populated. I think this movie hints at that in the first half and could use a little, just bit more of that. But I did enjoy, that they have Mole Man in here and stuff like that, because that was also a ever-present comic trope, I know at one point, is mole people and the underground. Because there's a whole Superman movie about that, if you've never seen it. Superman versus the Mole Men. And I just love that that's a thing.
Well, and specifically, Mole Man is from Fantastic Four #1. There's a whole part in the kind of prologue section where you get Doctor Who's Mark Gatiss narrating to you, which obviously he's an actor, a lot of stuff. But whenever I see him, I just think about him writing episodes of Doctor Who. But in one of those sequences, they show what is basically a recreation of the cover Fantastic Four #1, where you get one of the giant monsters that comes up out of the street, and then they all assemble to fight him. We're 5 Fantastic Four movies in, and this movie does a very good job, and I appreciate that it kind of just gets into it. I'm still waiting for Fantastic Four movie just to replicate the opening of Fantastic Four #1, which of how all 4 of them assemble together, because it's a great opening for a movie that's just waiting to be made. Eventually there will be another first Fantastic Four movie to do that with. But regardless, they use some of those visuals and stuff, and Mole Man as this presence. I mean, he's just a character from the comic books. He's from Fantastic Four #1, Subterranea, the world of the mole people. Yeah, absolutely. This is, just one of those sci-fi pulp tropes of, the underground people, whether they're Morlocks in the H.G. Wells' The Time Machine or whatever. It's just such a super common trope from early science fiction that it's cool to see it brought in here. I love that they have him have the little fucking dopey glasses that have little slits, which, they don't explain this in the movie, but the reason why he has those is because he's the Mole Man. He can't, he's very sensitive to light. It's why he gets driven to the underground, because he's just a regular person who has some sort of deformity or whatever. That means he can't see properly, or his eyes hurt tremendously from light. And so that's why he's driven underground, and his hate for the surface dwellers causes him to, bring all the mole people together and invade the surface world. And I do really like his presence in this movie and the way they realize all those different elements.
They joke in the movie, and it's even the post-credits scene does this, about there being a Fantastic Four cartoon series in the world of the movie. Mm-hmm. But, totally unironically, Marvel should make that. Marvel should make, it doesn't have to be exactly like the silly one they show in here, but I would love to see them take the aesthetic that they developed for this movie, make a cartoon series for Disney+, maybe get this cast to do the voices if they can afford them, or get people who sound alike, but, use their likenesses, and, because a lot of these villains that we're mentioning couldn't support a movie, but they could support TV episodes, and I would love to just have a good Disney Plus show that does some of this, because it's kind of like when Spider-Man Homecoming came out, and my reaction to that was, this is a lot of fun, but it almost makes me want a Spider-Man TV show, not a Spider-Man movie. Mm-hmm. And I kind of felt that way about this, of I want to see them on more kind of adventures of the week. And that would be a fun way to do, because they couldn't do that in live action. It would be too expensive. But I think you could do a really fun cartoon with it. And that would be, I feel like that would be very a good fit for their whole Disney Plus plan. So
yes, yeah. I mean, that's obviously we've been banging this drum for over a decade at this point of superhero fiction is serialized for a reason.
Yes.
And also animated is by far the most logical adaptation. So it's it just so happens that for DC, the best thing they've ever made in terms of adaptations of their properties happens to be a bunch of animated series they made in the late 90s and early 2000s. Yes, and absolutely that would be great for the Fantastic Four. In fact, because that cartoon is a reference to the actual real world old Fantastic Four cartoon, which is where Herbie is from.
Right.
Herbie the robot is not a comic book creation. He's from the old cartoon, which is a fun thing that they brought into the movie. But yes, yeah, it would be cool to have for Marvel to commit more in that direction.
Well, because also with this specifically, it would be it wouldn't present any continuity issues either, because you have the 4 years before this movie starts, and then you have a 4-year jump at the end of the movie with the little Doctor Doom reveal. So you've got all this time where you could just tell stories, and it wouldn't have to step on the feet of anything else they're doing, because I know I don't really care about that, but I know they care about that. So, like, it's part of why it took them so long to get their Spider-Man cartoon out, is because they were trying to figure out, how it would fit into the continuity of the whole MCU Peter Parker, and then they're like, it's a different continuity, and they just went with, but you could just do it, and that would be fun. But yeah, so yeah, the world of the movie, A+, they got all of that down, and then I think the four themselves are great, and really the thing that distinguishes this movie from all the others, because there are other great versions of Johnny Storm and Ben Grimm on film. The Tim Story movies, if you can say anything good about those movies, it is that Ben Grimm and Johnny Storm, they nailed perfect, great. But none of there have been 4 of these fucking movies. None of them got Reed or Sue even all that close, I think, to being interesting, or even really positioning them as the heroes of the movie, which they kind of should be. And I think this movie, that is where it feels like this movie is committed, and I think it nails it. I think Pedro Pascal is a great Reed Richards, and I especially think Vanessa Kirby is a great Sue Storm. And putting them front and center and really making them leaders of the team, like, that is where this movie, I think, is the most important corrective to other film versions of these characters.
Absolutely, because it's a thing where I think, like, the Tim Story movies, the 2005-2007 one, kind of just lean really hard on Johnny and the Thing, because they're easy characters to have pop, because they're very eccentric characters, and so those movies just go really hard, and it's actually true for at least the Thing, kind of the unreleased one from the 90s as well. It has like a whole elaborate subplot involving the Thing, because it's like a really easy arc to do for the the guy who is literally inspired by the Universal monsters, like Frankenstein's monster, just like the Hulk was. You're just kind of doing that kind of thing, and it's a movie designed arc, and so those movies lean into it really hard. But the problem with that is that then the central plot just is nothing, particularly that 2005 one. It just doesn't have an actual core story. Instead, it's put all of its energy into doing the little one-off kind of sitcom scenes and having those two characters really pop. And so, I don't think that Johnny or Ben Grimm pop in the same way in this movie. They don't, stand out as well as the Chris Evans, Michael Chiklis version did. But that's because this movie is not, leaning on them to be the thing that makes the movie fun. Instead, it's no, we're trying to tell an actual story with this whole team and this group of characters. And in that way, it just feels much more like properly the Fantastic Four, where are Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman the most out there, eccentric, funny characters? No, they're a little bit more kind of staid and a little bit more, I don't want to say dull, but they're not cartoonish in terms of their characterization. But they're the driving force of the team. And in many ways, their relationship is the actual driving relationship of the team. And yeah, I think that this movie did a really good job of looking at it as a whole team of characters and not looking at them as individuals and thinking about what bits can we write for these individual characters, which is kind of what the Tim Story movies felt like. And here it's no, what is the whole story we're telling with this group of 4 people who are a made family together having to deal with this crisis? And that's what I think, that's the secret sauce of this movie that allows them to do the Fantastic Four in a way that none of the other movies have been able to do.
Yes, and I am, and I think everyone is particularly impressed with how they finally got Sue Storm right,
Yes.
Because, I think everyone knew Vanessa Kirby was going to knock it out of the park because she's knocked everything she's ever done out of the park. She's just an awesome actress. But I think, the amount that they really commit to the totality of the character, that, they find a bunch of ways to make her a much more stronger, independent character than she would have been in the original comics run, right?
Yes.
She's a political figure, and gets the big hero moment at the end of the movie and all of that. But she is also a wife and a mother, and that's part of who she is, and she gets to be that. And, this is not Marvel's shitty corporate feminism from, Avengers Endgame of all the women characters are going to be on screen together. It's not that. It feels like she gets to be an actual three-dimensional human being who is a woman and not incidentally, right? And that's good storytelling. That's you're actually committing to the humanity of the character. And yeah, Vanessa Kirby has absolute movie star energy, and she brings it. And to a degree that I actually think it allows Pedro Pascal to play more smaller and insular and kind of downplay it than I think he otherwise would have to. But I think that's perfect for Reed Richards, because he isn't the rock star of the family or even of his couple, right? And so, like, I think all of that, like, their chemistry and everything, it just falls into place really, really well.
Yeah, and I do definitely think, like, the strongest thing about this movie, in terms of the character work, is Vanessa Kirby as Sue, because, yeah, that is where, you know, obviously Sue Storm in the comics has become much more like the character in this movie, but if you're looking at the original 1960s comics, she is the wife. You know, there's, like, if you want some grade A old school sexism, like, read some of those old Silver Age comic books, because it's like, you're like, oh yeah, this is what it was like. This is like the authentic shit.
I remember you telling me about this way back on the podcast, Sean, of, like, there's lines like, Sue, you're a credit to your sex, and stuff like that. That's all over those comics. And it's always stuck with me as, like, what a funny, horrible thing to say.
Yeah, it's you know, it's funny because a lot of the Marvel comics were really trying to be fairly progressive on, like, racial politics, because, you know, it's the 60s, it's the civil rights movement. You know, Stan Lee was you know, a kind of hippie, you know, maybe, you know, also a hippie who really liked his money, but also a sort of, like, political hippie in many ways. And obviously a lot of the artists were as well. Not Steve Ditko. You know, let's not talk about the politics of Steve Ditko too much. But the point being that it's you know, they were pushing really hard on some of the, like, more progressive racial elements, and then also things like trying to integrate, like, the rising drug use and stuff like that, and dealing with that in their narratives. But it took a long time for them, and maybe never fully, really, for the superhero comic book industry to kind of reconcile its attitude towards women. But it was particularly awful in those old comic books. And yeah, here it's just like, I love the dynamic between her and Reed, that she is, like, the light of the team and he's the shadow, you know, like, she's the one who, she's, like, bright, confident, she's the one going out there being this kind of more public leader in many ways, in this kind of political force in the world. Whereas Reed is there, you know, and he's still, you know, he's, like, gives a couple of those speeches, although when he gives speeches, it kind of fucks everything up. Like, they really, when he's the one who goes up there and gives a speech when they come back, really they should have had Sue say whatever, you know, say the return speech there. Obviously, she had literally given birth to a child, like, a day ago or something, so...
Well, they're all, I actually really like that scene, because they're all, like, shell-shocked, and Reed just defaults to what he is, which is, he's a scientist, he just tells the truth. Yeah. Just like, hey, this is what happened.
Tells the unvarnished, objective events of what occurred.
And it's the exact wrong thing to do, but it feels very in character,
Yeah, and so I think you're right to say that Vanessa Kirby having this, like, really strong, super charismatic, kind of bold character she's playing, it contrasts really well, where it gives Pedro Pascal this space as, like, the nominal leading man of the movie, but not giving a leading man kind of performance, which I think is cool. Like, and I like the way that Reed feels quiet, very quiet. He feels very introverted. I mean, kind of uncomfortable often with, you know, being kind of put in that more leadership position. And he feels most himself when he's at his big chalkboard writing all of his crazy, you know, equations and stuff. And I like that, like, the one place where you see him kind of breaking out of his shell a little bit is clips of his Fantastic Science with Mr. Fantastic show. Yes. It's like Bill Nye looking thing that is really good, or his, like, 60s version of Bill Nye. And that's where you see him most in his element, is just doing the science and talking about it. And yeah, that contrast between those characters and how Reed has this, you know, feeling of that he struggles with the morality of some of his thoughts, because he is there trying to think through every contingency and every element of the problem he's faced with. And when those are human problems, he's thinking about awful, terrible things. And I think, and there is, like, a quiet darkness to the character there that I think Pedro Pascal portrays, that I honestly wish they went a little bit deeper into. But is also, like, I think it's a cool part of something that is there in the comics, not necessarily in the 60s ones as much, but it's definitely a part of the Reed Richards character that, you know, Reed Richards is a character that in alternate universes oftentimes ends up as a villain, because I think there is that element there that, like, once he takes his worldview too far, it gets very fucked up very quickly. And I like that you have little seeds of it here in such a way that if they wanted to do a, like, villain turn story where he gets mind possessed or whatever, like, they could eventually do that with this version of the character.
Yes. And I just, it plays to Pedro, and Pedro Pascal can do big movie star energy, we know, but I think this really plays to some of his strengths as kind of a character actor. And yeah, if he weren't so goddamn busy, I feel like they would have had a whole viral marketing campaign of him doing those science videos online or something, because I would totally watch that. Because it's less Bill Nye than it is like the PBS painter guy Bob Ross, but doing science.
Yeah.
And it does have that kind of PBS energy that is kind of infectious, and I love that. Yeah, again, anything to do with kind of like their whole position in the world is just perfectly done. But then I do also really like how this movie positions Johnny and Ben, where like I think the movie is very cognizant of the fact that the thing people will remember from the old Fantastic Four movies is Johnny and Ben. And these are actually pretty distinct takes on them. Like, Ebon Moss-Bachrach's Ben is a much calmer, more... He's just kind of the guy there. He's the... I was going to say he's the rock, but like literally, right? He's the rock of the family, both in his physicality and in who he is. And I love that he's just got this very kind of zen vibe about him. He obviously is not super happy about being a big rock dude, and he has some moments of reflection. But it also isn't like the tortured version of the character that Michael Chiklis played in the Tim Story movies. He's maybe moved past that a little bit and is more at home in his own, rock-like skin. And then for Johnny, this is not total asshole dickhead Johnny, but it is like obviously hothead Johnny who kind of wants to prove himself and is the little brother of the group. And I think he gets, I think the best scene in the third act is him and his whole pursuit of the Silver Surfer and all of that, where he's put the language stuff together and he's trying to prove that because that's another thing that I think gets lost in some other versions is like, why would they put up with Johnny if he's such an asshole, but he also doesn't kind of contribute anything? Yeah. And here it's like, he's a little bit of an asshole, but also he's brilliant. Like, Reed put him on the team for a reason, not just nepotism. And I like that you get to see that here. And so the whole dynamic of the family feels very well considered, and everybody gets to feel very distinct from any other film version we've seen so far.
Yeah, and most importantly, they all fit together really well, and they work together as a unit on screen really well. And they all have good chemistry with each other, yeah. And I absolutely obviously I think the Thing is probably the character that gets the least stuff in the movie to do because Johnny has his whole subplot with the Silver Surfer, and they have a little bit of that thing with the woman who runs the Jewish orphanage or whatever that is.
Yeah, the Natasha Lyonne character.
Yeah, there's a little bit of thing there, but they don't go super far into it. But I do think he still feels like a fundamental part of the team, and in the the broader team chemistry, he works really well. And then I do really like what they do with Johnny. I like that they make him smart. That sure he's he can be a bit of a hothead and all that kind of stuff. That's still there, but they don't make him a dumbass. Which, to be fair, he kind of is a dumbass most of the time. This is another kind of Sue Storm, where it feels like they're updating the character a little bit. Although also, in the comics, he was always kind of a little bit of a motorhead as well, and there was kind of an engineering part of it, which they don't bring here, but instead turning that into this, he's very smart, and, maybe he's not super genius Reed Richards level, but you give him some equipment and some time, and he can figure out this language shit, and that he's also considerate enough to think about, I can't burden Reed with all this other stuff too. I can handle this. I think that's just a really cool moment where you see this character. We get a sense of all of them, that they have grown into their roles as superheroes, and you're seeing a more completed version of the character, and not one where all of them are constantly at odds with themselves and their powers and all that kind of stuff. And it gives the movie so much more space to do its sci-fi plot that it's doing. And I just think all that stuff's really well written, it's really well portrayed, and it's really well considered for how it fits into the scope of the overall film.
Yeah, and Joseph Quinn is the closest to being an unknown coming into this movie. If you watch a lot of British TV, he's been on a lot of British TV, I'm seeing on his resume. But this is his first big starring role in a Hollywood movie, and he's great. And it's a very, very different energy than Chris Evans brought to it, which I think is important because Evans, they had Evans in Deadpool and Wolverine last year doing this version of the character. That character does live in the public memory to some degree. And I think I really, again, I like the little brother energy to it. But it's not complete asshole little brother. It just, again, it fits, it works. You can sense the history with everybody in the group, and that's fun. And then, of course, with the Thing, we also just have to say, I love the design that they went for in this. It's just straight up the original Jack Kirby design, right? Yeah. Of his face and everything. But it looks great. I love when they do the whole blackout thing and you learn about how he shaves, which is with just a giant, industrial, rock cutter, and then he has a beard for the last act of the movie. That might be genuinely the best thing about the last act, is Thing with a beard is very funny, and I enjoyed that.
Yes, that was amazing. And yeah, it's like, it's such a good joke to do with the whole, like, they have to conserve power, and so the power goes off mid shaving. But having that be the thing, and so he's got like his little half beard until he grows it all the way out. And I like that, because you get, a little bit of that Johnny thing of Johnny gives him a little bit of shit, but then like the turnaround on it is like totally casually in the back of a scene later on. Ben walks in with the full beard, and Johnny looks at him and is like, "Hey, nice beard." He's like, "Yeah." And that's it. And I like that there's like, it feels like a more kind of positive version of the kind of like male relationship of like, yeah, they give themselves shit sometimes, but they actually really like each other. And it's not as like sitcom energy, like they aren't constantly at each other's throats to the extent of like, doing violence against each other. It's like a little bit of teasing, but at the end of the day, they really, really do like each other a lot. Like I like that that's where they've kind of found the balance with the relationship between those two characters.
It's a lot better than in Fantastic when Johnny says, "You're the thing that nobody wanted."
Yes, yeah. When you learned that Johnny Storm at the end of the movie was a sociopath the whole time, yeah, it's definitely a far cry from Fantastic.
In every possible way, yes. No, yeah. So yeah, the main team, excellent. I love all this stuff. The thing, like, they did do the thing with CGI. I think it's like 95% good. My one complaint is I do think in some moments, I don't think he's placed in the scene well enough. There's some like lighting stuff on him where you can, it's like, if you just look at like his face or something, it looks very real. But I think there's some moments where like him interacting with things, or like when he walks through a room, he doesn't feel like he has kind of the right weight. And so there were moments where I found myself wishing they'd done it with prosthetics like the Tim Story movie, but it's never like bad. Like it's never distracting really.
Yeah, I think it's not like it didn't come across to me as like a world-altering achievement of visual effects, but it's like a totally credible version of doing that with the character, and it's understandable. Like, it's obviously you could do it with prosthetics. It's been done twice with prosthetics, and those were really good, but it is understandable that you'd want to have him be a digital character. I get it.
And, technology has advanced to the point that, in 2005, this would have been newer and harder, but now they had the actor he's on set with them at all times in the mocap rig, and that's fine. And so he is getting to at least, like, react to the other characters and all that, so you don't have those problems that could arise from a CG version of the character. So, definitely all good there. And there's not a ton of characters in this movie outside of the main four. Obviously, we talked about Mole Man, who's played by Paul Walter Hauser, who's a funny character actor, and I enjoyed that. But then we have our two villains, Silver Surfer and Galactus, and I like the choice here where they went with the Shala Ball version of Silver Surfer. So they had Julia Garner, which is, that, because otherwise this is basically exactly the arc from Rise of the Silver Surfer, just with Johnny in place of Sue as the person who kind of like speaks to the character. But I do think Julia Garner doing that version of the character gives it a different flavor. And I do really like the scene. Like, I love how it's shot where we see the glimpses of her home planet and all of that, where it kind of looks like a scene out of like, if you're doing a Marvel movie like Eternals or something, where it's just a very different movie that we're looking at that she comes from. And I also genuinely thought the effects on her were really good. Like all the reflections off of her silver body, like that was unusually good from Marvel in this day and age. And she's not in the movie a ton, so maybe that helps, but I did enjoy that character.
Yeah, I think they did a very good job with Silver Surfer because, yes, I mean, obviously it's a fairly similar arc as the 2007 movie, but that is also because they're both just adapting the same broad storyline from the comics where, neither of them do it all the way, but like in order to defeat Galactus, you need to turn Silver Surfer, because the Silver Surfer is the only other person with the power cosmic, and everybody else is just sort of desperately flailing around hoping to do something to Galactus, and then this dude shows up and can actually do something, or this lady in this version. And I do think going with the Shala Ball or like a female version of Silver Surfer works. I think there's something, particularly with having like the hair, I think it's something with like the effects, like it gives a little bit more detail on the character's head and face for your like eye to latch onto, that I think is one of the things that helps the effects work better. I know that like if it was just like the totally flat bald look, I don't think would like work quite as well, but there's something about, I think they just like nailed that design of the character that feels very ethereal and otherworldly. The reflections and all of that look really good, but then also there's enough detail in the head and face that you can personify her. And I think that they just like found the right lane where she has a little bit of that weird cosmic, like, what the fuck is this thing energy, especially when she shows up early on. but then also enough of the personality there that you can believe that there is a person underneath all of this that is experiencing an emotional toll of being Galactus's slave effectively, and while she is not a willing subservient to Galactus truly, she still is responsible to some extent for all these other worlds being destroyed. And then I like the detail of this that they add, because I don't think that this is the original narrative. Maybe I'm misremembering, but the thing that she is the one selecting the planets, and that she is culpable in that way, I think is a good detail. So yeah, like she's not like a very prominent, or she's a very prominent character that doesn't show up a lot. She doesn't have a lot of screen time, but I just think the execution of the character is so strong. And I think it works a lot better that she comes in like really short, strong bursts and is not a just like constant feature of the movie. I just think they like balance that character super well.
I mostly agree. I think my one true structural problem with the third act of the movie is that you get this really big scene before Galactus shows up with Johnny and her. That is like one of the high points of the movie. And then she is gone until the moment she comes in to save the day. And I wish there was a little bit more that could feel like a little bit more of a denouement to the character, a little bit more with Johnny. I don't know exactly what it would be, but it does like there's such a time gap between that exchange and then her flying in at the last second to save the day, that I think like in the moment it winds up feeling like more of a Deus Ex Machina than it should, because it was very earned. I just think like if you're like mapping this out, there's too much space between that scene and this scene for I think it to land exactly the way it needs to.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think that's like a broader problem with the third act as well, as I think that there's a tedium and a repetitiveness to the like, we're building all the things that are going to teleport the thing, and there's all that process, and then they get blown up, and then we have a different plan for teleporting him. And I think some of that stuff could be tightened up a little bit. And I think the Silver Surfer stuff works in the same way, as like if there was a closer proximity to that confrontation with Johnny and then Galactus coming, I agree that I think that would make her coming in to save the day and Johnny does not have to sacrifice himself feel like an even stronger moment. Like I still think it works well in the movie, but I think there is a broader just kind of messiness to the time scale of how things are working in that last section of the movie that just feel kind of awkward and could have been tightened up a bit more.
Yeah. But speaking of the big guy, we've got Galactus. Yes. Sean, what do you think? Is this or Rise of the Silver Surfer Cloud Galactus better?
This is way better. I love this. We've got Ralph Ineson. Diablo 4 is Ralph Ineson. If you play Diablo 4, he's the voice of the like main Herodric guy who's just all over that game. So you get his like super deep voice just constantly, and it's a pretty good part of that game.
He's done lots of cool stuff, and he's done stuff like this before. He was the title character in The Green Knight, where he's in the makeup and everything, doing the voice. He's great in that. Anything kind of like this, like is voice reliant, he's good at. And yeah, I love his performance here. I also love, I'm not 100% sure how they did Galactus, but I know they did have him on set in a costume, and it obviously some digital trickery had to go into this because he is so much bigger, but it does look like they shot something with him and he isn't just a big CG element in every scene. So however they did it, I really like his like physical, like clearly they took Rise of the Silver Surfer to heart and went hard into how do we make sure he is a physical presence in the movie, and his big scenes are very good, particularly when they meet him out in space and he's on his throne and all of that stuff is just awesome.
Yeah, I think there's just like a presence to the character that is really awesome. And yeah, there's like the way they sell the scale of him and like just like, and it is especially in that first scene where they encounter him. Like once he's on Earth, it gets like a little Godzilla, like, you know, which is, I have no problem with it getting a bit Godzilla with Galactus, but they maybe could have like, I feel like the ending of the movie should have been at night. Like, I think it was a mistake to have it be during the day, but that's a different part. But I think it kind of hurts a little bit the effects of Galactus, where I think when he's giant and also kind of shrouded in darkness, like it just gives this character, again, it's that Lovecraftian element. Like a lot of Jack Kirby's stuff, you know, with his, when he went to DC, he had the New Gods and like Darkseid and Apocalypse, and he had a lot of this sort of like these modern deities and these modern entities that are beyond the kin of mankind that also happen to dress up into very ridiculous suits, and they're very silly looking because they are very silly looking. So in that sense you can kind of understand them, but I do think they capture that, like, he is not a thing that can be like reasoned with. He is personified. He was once a human style creature and all that kind of stuff, but he's from before our universe existed, and he's driven by this unknowing, all-consuming hunger, and that's the only thing that drives him. Like, I think they just like captured that quality of the character really well in a way that I enjoyed, and especially when they first encounter him, just the absolute terror of being confronted with this gigantic being that you can't do anything against. Like, the best you can do is distract him and run away, or at the end of the movie the best thing you can do is distract him and push him like half a city block and go like, you go over there. Like, they can't beat Galactus, they could just move him over there somewhere, like get him out of our shit, and then because he's an eternal creature that will last for all time, and he will last beyond time. He is above the concept of time itself. We will all be dead by the time Galactus bothers to get his way back to Earth. So, it's fine. And I like that dynamic. I like that he just feels like he exists in a kind of different world than everything else. And I like that. And I like the way he treats humanity, right? Like, when he lands on the Earth and he lifts up the dust and smells it, and there's just this sort of like, that's the way he views the planets. It's like, this is a good one. There's a lot of energy here for me to eat. Like, you get the sense that he's looking forward to it. And then my other favorite moment is when Mr. Fantastic is fighting him, and he just picks up Mr. Fantastic and starts stretching him, being like, and he just keeps stretching him like a bit by bit. And there's just where he really looks at these humans like they are insects, like they're weird little playthings. I think they capture the energy of, it is like a kid with a magnifying glass and some ants. That is truly what we are to him. And there's a nonchalant playfulness to the way he interacts with everything, because he is so outside our knowledge, that I really, really like. I just think they did a great job with Galactus.
I agree, and this is where I'm a little torn, because I agree with everything you're saying, and I think the character himself, they did pretty much perfectly. I do feel like this is where the third act problems arise again. I needed like some kind of new gear there at some point in the movie, because from his introduction in the second act through to the end, like, him being static, I guess, is not the problem, because exactly as you say, he exists before time, he is bigger than any of these characters, he's practically a god, all these things. But I did just feel like, and maybe it's because of the amount of time spent watching him stomp through the city, I needed some kind of new gear to those interactions or dynamics. I don't mean I needed him to, like, sit down on a building and do a monologue about his past and all of that. Like, I don't need that kind of depth. I just mean that the dynamics of the fight had to shift a little more to support this as a feature film, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think it's part of that, like, there's just too much going on in that in the climax. Like, I think, like, if they tightened up the stuff with the teleporters a bit more, again, I also just think they should have set that whole fight at night. I think that's part of, like, the Godzilla-ness of it that feels like just a little off tone for Galactus, that you're just seeing him in broad daylight stomping it around. I just think, like, it would work better if there was a little bit more mystery and terror and horror, and that, like, you can try to throw fireballs at him, or you can try to wrap yourself around his body or whatever, but that should be so futile that honestly there should be maybe even less time spent on that and more on, like, the characters realize that there's nothing they could do. And then I think the idea of, to be clear, none of this is what the comics do. Like, they're totally off comics for a good reason, because the comic book explanation for them getting rid of Galactus is, to the Watcher gives Reed Richards the ultimate nullifier, which is basically a big cube with a red button on it that if you press it, it will nullify Galactus. That's from Beyond Time also. And Reed Richards is like, I've got the ultimate nullifier because the Watcher gave it to me. And Galactus is like, oh shit, I guess I gotta leave. So, this is the worst part of the original story, is like, how do you get rid of Galactus? Because he's so hyped up to be so powerful, there's really no way to beat him. And so how you actually defeat him is always going to be like a little off feeling, I think. But what they do here with having Invisible Woman, who is the most powerful member of the Fantastic Four, she's got the best powers, like her force field stuff, and her just expending all of her life just to push him. Like her whole being just to push this guy a little bit to get him into the teleporter, and then Silver Surfer comes in and gives that last extra push you need to again, not to defeat him, not to beat Galactus, just to move him somewhere else. I think like that whole resolution, I think, is like well designed to maintain some of the mysticism of the character. That I think that like some of those other things of the prolonged action sequences beforehand, it being just shot in kind of flat mid-noon daylight, just like doesn't, it works against the other things they've done with the character.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, because I agree that it is the right ending, and I love the whole idea of Sue just going, full tilt. This is the absolute most I can do. And also realizing what, like, Reed, with all of his intelligence, can't, which is that all we can do is push. Like, Reed is trying to outsmart Galactus, and you can't, because intelligence doesn't play into this, right? And so she is just, it's just this raw, push him until we can push him no more. And I like that. The problem is that there's too much pushing before that, like metaphorically, right? And so it feels a little drawn out. And I think this is also where one of my complaints about the third act is just how empty it feels, that it is just the Four and Galactus in this big empty city. And on one hand, I'm glad they emptied out the city, because that is the responsible thing for the Fantastic Four to do, obviously. But, like, I think it could be empty and still have, like, I wish there was more going on. I wish there was more dynamics. Like, we put everyone down in the underground, and we even went to the trouble of, like, developing the Natasha Lyonne character so we have some human touchstone down there, but then we never go back there and do anything. Like, is there something that could be going on there just to make the situation feel more alive? I'm not sure what it needs to be, but it just does feel a little bit like, again, empty, I think, is the right... Like, if I compare this to, like, the city fight, in the Avengers, the Joss Whedon movie, that is one where the whole city feels very alive and contingent as they're having this big fight. And part of that is because it's a whole swarm of enemies they're fighting, not just one big dude. But, like, that is something that I think makes this feel... And I agree with you that I think the midday photography is also a mistake there. Just makes it feel a little drier than it needs to be for what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's one of the places where you can feel the Marvel studio method, I don't know if it is one of those things that obviously know about where they've like pre-vised it, created the whole action scene before they even got the director that they have done on previous movies. I don't know if that is the case with this scene, but it has that feel like they kind of have designed this. And, and it being in the midday and them fucking, thing throwing the thing at Galactus and it not working, like, all that stuff is from the original comic book story. So I think they're trying to replicate some of those action moments, but I think it's just a mistake. And I do think that, like, just tightening all of that up, having the night that Human Torch convinces Silver Surfer, like, have him be doing that while Galactus is landing on the planet somewhere else, right? And he gets here before we realized he was going to get here, and the city is not totally evacuated, and we have to get everyone into the fucking Subterranea. Like, just, like, add that sense of urgency, and that the Fantastic Four should feel more on the back foot, and have, like, that, we're going to use Franklin as bait, be more of a last-ditch effort thing. I just think there's a way that you can compress the timeline they've created at the end of the movie to create this bigger sense of urgency that they really get through by the skin of their teeth, and that's the thing that I think is really lacking there, especially when you compare how intense and incredible the action sequences at the midpoint of the movie and how it feels like they barely get away from the Silver Surfer. Like, that is such an action high point that everything at the end of the movie just feels so much lesser than what that was. And again, this is not a unique problem with Fantastic Four. There are a lot of movies like this that have this problem where the mid-movie action sequence is really good and the end one is just kind of like, eh. But it is like the biggest, I think, problem with this movie is how all that plays out.
I think you're totally right. And I think you just pointed to a really good way this could be better. And I think that's part of the frustration is that this is a case of, as you just said, second act is the best action, the third feels worse. One difference, though, is that you can see how the third act stuff could be just as good. And I think it's what you're saying. I think if you compressed it all into one night, and this is where I also think it could feel less empty if you had each of the four doing something more distinct. And it's exactly what you're saying. Johnny is off dealing with Silver Surfer. While maybe you have Ben handling the evacuation and doing stuff with that. And then maybe Reed and Sue at the center. And maybe even you put a little more conflict on it, where like it's last minute and Reed is arguing for we've got to, try to use Franklin as bait and Sue is against it or something, right? And so there's a little bit more friction. And because I think all of that, if your endpoint is Sue using the force field, which that does not at all feel like a previs someone else did. That is clearly Matt Shakman and the main crew working their asses off. I feel like that desperation would come through stronger if it was desperate all the way up to that. And like last minute, we've got no plan,
Yeah, because I do think there's just like, especially because you just have that very awkward section where you spent all the time coming up with the plan with the teleporters, and then it's like, oh, and we have to figure out the power grid, and I like all that stuff. Like I like them showing humanity rallying behind it, and then you have Silver Surfer come in and blow all that shit up. And then you have the stuff with, like, Human Torch has to go confront her. And then you have a whole nother plan scene that is like the earlier plan scene. But now it's, oh, we'll just use one teleporter. It's like, well, why did you just use one teleporter in the first place? Like, surely this was a better plan than trying to rally the entire human race to, it's just like, it's too repetitive and too much like we're doing steps to this plot. That I think also takes away from character moments that could be fit in there to serve it better. But it just feels like they're adding all this extra shoe leather to what's going on here that doesn't need to be there. It's just that stuff that slows down and kind of confuses that last section of the movie.
Well, and let's talk about sort of the thematic aspect here, because I think I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about this, Sean. But just to give my, like, 50,000-foot view, I do think, like, because you hinted at this earlier with, like, Reed could be a darker character. And like they set up at that midpoint this horrific conflict for the group where Galactus will back off if they give him the baby. And obviously that is untenable for the main Fantastic Four, but you also understand why the planet Earth would be a little bit like, yeah, chuck the baby at him. What are you doing? Like, it's one baby, right? And like that is a profound moral dilemma, right? And yet we then go into this long sequence where the entire Earth rallies around them. I guess because Sue did make a very nice speech. But it does beggar belief a little bit. It feels a little disconnected. And then they do wind up having to, use the baby at bait at the end anyway. And that does create a conflict in the group, but not that much of a conflict. And at the end of the day, and I think this is, if I can define my one problem with the movie in one sentence, it is that this movie uses a structure where you start and end with the same scenario of them on the Ted Gilbert show. But the problem is, it's the same scene. It is Ted Gilbert saying the same things about them. It is the public having the same relation to them. It's the Fantastic Four having the same relation to the public. Nothing that happened in this movie changed the Fantastic Four's either standing in the world or understanding of their place in the world. And I think the pieces are there for that to happen. I think the Franklin thing could be a much more profound test of their relationship to the world, where like their heroism has come pretty easily at this point because it has not involved you sort of newfound like sacrifice. Like they've sacrificed to some degree. The Thing is a rock now, all of that stuff, right? But like this is a different kind of challenge. It is a different kind of relationship to the public. And it just, that is where like, that is my number one issue with the movie, is that there is that flatness. And it is an extra problem when you can see the ingredients for it not to be so flat.
Yeah, I think that there's that. And I think for me, the other thing is that there's another layer of thematic stuff in the movie that kind of goes away when they come shortly after they come back from Earth, where I think part of what makes the middle part of the movie so dynamic is both you've got like, you have like a lot of cool action stuff and the mystery and the horror of Galactus destroying these planets and things. But for me, like the height of what this movie is doing that is really interesting is when they encounter Galactus and he's scanning them, and then the scan lands on Sue, and then it narrows down to her pregnant belly. And that is, to me, that moment is like really potent. And I do think that there is something here that I don't even know, kind of based on like where the movie goes at a certain point, if they're fully kind of cognizant that they've got it. But there is a really potent thematic juxtaposition here, where Reed and Sue having this baby being juxtaposed with the advent of Galactus, the world destroyer, is a really powerful story of like how having a child destroys your world. It changes your life, right? Immutably. Yeah. Like you can't go back, and everything that you were now is going to change because you have this kid, and your role in the world is not as a like man and husband or whatever, it's as a father, and it's not as a woman and blah blah blah, it's as a mother, right? Like that is now this thing that you must be. And so I think there is something about that of like the apocalypse being contrasted with these two people being a parent for the first time and confronting the reality of that, especially because it's an unexpected pregnancy that neither of them thought was going to actually happen. And I think that there's just a lot more energy there that they could have gotten out of that if they went deeper into it. And obviously, like, the other thing that it is doing that is like very much part of the text is that they don't know what is going on with this baby. That they think, like, reads around all of his tests, and it's like, well, all the tests say he's a human and he'll be perfectly fine, but Galactus has narrowed it down on him. And so there's this uncertainty, which obviously every parent's going to have, about, like, what is this child I'm going to have? Are they going to be normal? Are they going to be healthy? Is something going to go wrong? How is my life going to change? And I think that, like, there's a lot of that at that midpoint that is really juicy subtext, that is really powerful, because it's also all the action is right with her. He, like, induces Sue into labor, and she's having to give birth on the fucking ship, and all that stuff is so compelling. And then it just feels like the we're parents thing is not really dug into in the last act. Like, you know, there's little scenes with the baby. You've got a couple of decent little scenes between Reed and Sue where they talk about it. I really like the scene where Reed has Franklin and is talking to Franklin and trying to figure out if he's like a baby space god or whatever. And it's like, there's something wrong with me, and I hope there's not something wrong with you. Like, they do have little moments of it, but I just think, like, the movie keeps itself from diving as deep into that as it could, because to me it's the most interesting part of the thematic material it has to work with, because it does also have the, like, we're all a big family stuff, which you can tie all that in together, but it feels like it kind of shifts gears from this more interesting, slightly more darker, complicated subtext is working with into this more family friendly, flat kind of like, and we just have to all work together, and family doesn't let family go, and the stuff that Sue talks about is fine, but it's more platitude in front of the more, like, interesting stuff the movie is dealing with at the midpoint.
Absolutely. I mean, like, here's one of the problems of talking about a Fantastic Four movie is The Incredibles exists. And you always have to go through the problem that The Incredibles does all this correctly. And part of The Incredibles is a strong contrast here, because it's also doing the retro-futuristic thing, right? Mm-hmm. But in animation. But the other thing is, Incredibles is doing kind of everything you're saying, Sean, in terms of how it's really wrenching, actually, in how it depicts family. Like, it is about how the father starts feeling really stifled, and he makes these terrible decisions. And, like, that family has to be broken down before it comes back together at the end. So, like, when The Incredibles says family matters, it's because the characters have gone through a real, like, self-examination and wringer to get there. And The Incredibles also has all its Ayn Grandian stuff that I do not like in Brad Bird's work, but we can talk about that later. The other thing I thought you were going to say, Sean, based on how you set that up, is that I also think there's a contrast with Galactus and Reed that they could have gone harder on, where, you know, when you say Galactus scans them and then goes in on her pregnant belly, that is also what Reed is doing. They're both bypassing the woman Sue Storm to focus on the baby. Now, Galactus is doing it for much more nefarious reasons, and Reed's, you know, because Reed is obsessed with, like, he's testing the baby a bunch. There's a whole scene focusing on this where he hasn't built the crib, but he has built a, like, scanner to try to test the baby and all this stuff. And there is this dynamic where he is ignoring his wife as her own autonomous person to focus on the baby, which is an understandable, like, thing to do as a, like, new father, where you get obsessed with that. But, like, she even acknowledges that he has to pull back on that a little bit. But then, even though you have this very strong visual echo with Galactus, where Galactus does basically to her what Reed did, just with magic instead of science, but that never gets brought up again, that there is this really strong link between them as characters, where they are two sides of a coin in terms of, with Sue and her body and the baby inside her in between them. And that is another thing that just feels like very potent. I'm not sure how aware they are of how potent that is, but it's something you could really work with in that third act if you wanted to. And I think it's part and parcel with everything you're saying.
Yeah, I just think, like, there is a lot of very interesting material there that is like fairly provocative when you're, like, really digging into it. I think, you know, it's mostly subtext. It's built through juxtaposition of these different elements, but it's definitely there. And then all that kind of just gets kind of teased out of the movie by the ending in sort of how kind of slightly flat that third act is. And again, it just sort of like zooms out these themes about family into this just kind of very simple version of it, rather than the more interesting drama that you could get, where I think like you just don't get a sense of what are Reed and Sue like as parents of an infant. Like they just don't dig into that. And that's part of my problem of the like we have to have like 3 or 4 different plans that we create to stop Galactus. It's like use some more of that time to really show like, yes, they have to stop Galactus, but also they have to, you know, buy diapers, you know, like get a little bit more of the family drama stuff in there in the third act to, I think, build out some of those elements with the characters. Because again, there's some of it. I just don't think there's enough.
Yeah. And this is where also I just need to compare it to James Gunn's Superman, which is the last movie we talked about and is obviously on our minds because it just came out, and it's got some big similarities in terms of, I think, you know, tone and outlook. And like, you know, we talked about on the last episode that, you know, Superman reaches for a lot of big ideas, a lot of big themes. It makes significant, like, you know, alterations to some of Superman's source material to do this with the whole message from his parents. And not all of that works perfectly. We talked about how, like, on one hand, the message from the parents being something that Superman has to overcome, I think works on a character level really well. But then also as a political allegory, it muddles things in certain ways in terms of how it's talking about immigration, right? But like, I appreciate the pitch. Like, I love that it sometimes it is necessary to be messy to go for big ideas. And I think with what we're talking about, if they went for the Galactic versus Reed, Sue in the middle thing, or what you're talking about parenthood being a kind of apocalypse and all of these things, that would also be messy. And that probably would bring up thematic things that we would have to say, well, it works in this way, but it doesn't work in that way. I would bet that is something that would happen. But I would so much rather be having that conversation than having the conversation about, well, they didn't go for any of it and it's kind of flat. Because, you know, Superman is a movie that I just was constantly thinking about after seeing it. And I think part of it is because it goes for all of those things. And Superman also does the structure where the first scene and the last scene of the movie are a very intentional echo. But in Superman, there's this one really key change, which is that he's no longer listening to the message from his alien parents. He's listening to the message from his, or not message, but watching videos of his life on Earth. And he's really embraced his human side as his truest self. And so it shows the journey that the movie has gone on. And in this movie, the only difference between the beginning and the ending is they have to figure out how to get the you know, baby seat in the back of the car, the car seat in, which is a very relatable scene, I have to say. Yes. You have a niece now, you know how this goes.
Yes.
Anyway, but that is a superficial change. That is how do you make the car work for your baby? That is not how do you exist in the world. And I wish we had those kinds of things to grapple with from this movie, because even when it's messy, man, I feel like that's worth it. It is worth risking being messy to really go for big ideas, and that is the thing that Marvel just will not allow themselves to do, and I'm bummed about that.
Yeah, and honestly, like, I think the car seat change could be enough if it felt like they struggled with the baby more after they came back from Earth. Like, the problem is, like, the baby's just not enough of a presence in the movie once they're back from Earth, and specifically not enough of a dramatic presence. Like, I just feel like we need more of Reed and Sue really struggling over what does it mean to be a parent, because it feels like they've set up all those different elements. And again, you do have like a couple of little moments there, like you do have the one scene with Reed holding up Franklin, but it's just not. It feels like the movie backs off from like really diving into that. For instance, Sean, there's the scene where they are debating, like where Reed introduces his plan, or no, it's even before that, where he's talking about that he has thought about giving Franklin up, and he's trying to explain to Sue, like, look, this is what I do. I think about every opportunity. That doesn't mean I want to do it. But like, I do feel like that scene needs a little bit more of a knife at one point for him to say, yes, we owe it to Franklin, but we have become parent figures to Earth. Like, we have taken on the responsibility. Mm-hmm. Like, we do owe it to all these other people to at least think about this. And like, that's where, like, again, and bringing out a little bit more of maybe the darkness of the character, or at least the cold, clinical quality of his mind. It's those kinds of moments that feel like I wouldn't be surprised if they were in a draft of a script, but somewhere along the line the committee said, oh, that's too unlikable for Reed to say that, and so it gets sanded down. Yeah, it definitely is like a problem that the movie does not presents this sort of moral dilemma of, do we sacrifice the child for the world, or do we sacrifice the world for the child? And Sue gives the speech where she says we're not going to do either of those things. And I think the speech in that scene are great. The problem is they haven't, like, the team itself has not actually struggled or grappled with that notion, because I do think having Reed, it is in the real world, they shouldn't sacrifice the baby. This is, you have no idea if Galactus is going to actually follow through on it. But if you construct a perfect thought experiment, like an ethics experiment of, should you sacrifice the baby or should you sacrifice the entire planet, and take all the, like, messies of, like, you can never have a true assurance in the real world. Obviously, any ethicist would say, like, well, there are a lot of fucking babies on the planet, man.
It's the trolley problem, right? It's a big trolley problem.
It's a very ridiculous scaled trolley problem. And it's like, I think not having Reed confront that, is a problem. I mean, it's like, I feel like there just should be more of that struggling with the, like, when you're a parent, your whole ethical framework and how you see the world changes. Because, of course, I think that there are many parents who would say, fuck it, I don't care. like that, that their ethical framework is like, my child is everything. And that is a totally understandable thing. And I just think, there's like a lot of extra stuff there that I don't think the movie has to go insane and spend an extra hour or whatever doing that. But I think that there's just a lot of space there that they could have cut down on some of the plot stuff and gone more into that direction. And it would have made a better film.
Yeah. Other things I liked, we didn't talk about Herbie yet, except around the edges. Herbie rocks. Herbie, the robot, was very much done in the Baby Yoda style of, it is a physical prop. I was reading here, he's a mix of a wooden puppet, and then there are several pieces that are basically animatronics around him, and then there is some also visual effects involved. But whatever the specific combination, he's such a great physical presence. There's a little tick that I love that is such a great attention to detail, where every time any of the four interact with him, they give him this little scratch on the head like he's their dog, even though Herbie, I presume, cannot feel that. And it's especially his relationship with the Thing, because it does a great job showing you how Ben has learned to be very gentle in this body, because obviously if the Thing scratched his head too hard, there would be no more Herbie, but he just goes and just very lightly, just there you are, Herbie. And I love that. That is such a great little touch within the world of the movie.
Yes, yeah, it's a great, like, the physical presence of Herbie is awesome, and in every little, the way in which he just fits in, of like how he can help pilot the ship, or like, I love that, Ben, like Herbie is making the food in a lot of scenes, but then Ben has like a little extra, like, gotta throw this little extra thing in there, it's like, gotta give it the human touch. Yes. I like, that whole dynamic is definitely very fun. It's a great effect, the way that Herbie is executed.
Yeah, love that. Michael Giacchino did the score, who has done, obviously, a lot of superhero stuff. He did The Incredibles way back in the day. I believe that was his first big Hollywood score. And I actually am fairly impressed at how distinct he manages to make it, because he's working with all of, obviously, the same, like, aesthetic kind of signifiers between the two movies, because they're both going for this retro-futurist thing. I think Michael Giacchino has lost his fastball a little bit in some of the moment-to-moment, like, action scene scoring, but I think for the big themes and everything, it's great. And obviously the main theme that they've been using in all of the marketing, where it is this choir singing Fantastic Four, the words over this melody that, like, evokes those words, like, all of that stuff, and, like, the little, like, choral of voices going boop, 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 like, over the score. I love all of that. Like, the very aesthetic kind of style of the score is fantastic.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it really contributes to the overall feel of the world and the setting and the place that they've made, that it has that kind of 60s slightly cheesy vibe to it. It's very good.
And, they never did this in the Avengers movies, where individual characters had their own individual themes in Avengers. But when the Fantastic Four show up in Avengers, you don't pull in the Michael Giacchino theme and have that, like, kind of boppy sound behind them as they enter the movie, you failed. You absolutely need to do that in the next Avengers. That just feels like essential to me, right? Like, they need to bring that theme with them.
Yeah, in fact, I think they should have a theme for each, a different theme for each member of the Fantastic Four, where the choir just sings their name over again, like the thing, the thing, the thing, the thing, the thing, the thing. There's a lot of material to work with there.
I thought you were going to say they do that for all of the Avengers. So we have Captain America, Thunderbolts, all of that.
Iron Man, Iron Man, Iron Man. Yes, it should be like or it should be like a fucking Dragon Ball Super Broly, where you just have the fucking choir just like, go Gogeta, go, go, go. It's like, Captain America, let's go, Captain America. while he's fucking beating up the bad guy. It would be great.
Okay, now I'm very sold on this. Let's get this going. That actually sounds perfect, but there you go. Dragon Ball Super Broly, low key, best superhero movie of the modern era. Anyway, yeah. So I love all that. What else did you want to say about the film, Sean?
I think, we've talked a lot around that middle section that's really good, but I think there's a couple of like things to dive into that of just like, I do love, you have that kind of opening section that sets up their, she's pregnant. We learn about like the whole history of the Fantastic Four in this world and stuff, and Reed has set up his little trap, and then all of a sudden fucking fireballs start raining out of the night sky. Silver Surfer comes on high and says like, I herald death, I herald Galactus. Yeah, so I really love that feeling of how you go from this very like simple kind of happy, hopeful, optimistic world to, oh shit, the fucking apocalypse is here. And I just think that like that to them then going and finding Galactus. I love the look of the ship, of like the hyperspace, whatever, faster than light travel they use, like hooking up into this whole apparatus. Like all like the finicky details of that are really great. And there's just something about that whole process and then encountering Galactus and all of that it does a thing that is the Fantastic Four, which is that it has this energy of like a modern day version of your 50s, 60s era sci-fi B movie, of stuff like The Day the Earth Stood Still or Forbidden Planet, that sort of era. And like, that's just, it's cool because that is what the Fantastic Four are. Like they're not regular superheroes. They're not like a Superman or Spider-Man. They're not there to just go fight petty crime and stop bank robberies and stuff. Obviously they will do that on occasion. But they're much more of a kind of like genre superhero, like Batman is. How Batman is a detective, like, and so he is a superhero, but they tell detective stories through him. And Fantastic Four is that, but for sci-fi, and very much coming out of that era of sci-fi B movies. And there are lots of other superheroes like that, and they would obviously stick non-sci-fi superheroes with it as well. Batman has fought off more than a couple alien invasions over his illustrious career in the decades of the comic books. But it's just nice to watch a Fantastic Four movie that's actually doing that. That's actually having them go into space, investigate some sort of cosmic mystery, have it do some of this Jack Kirby weird alien god shit. I think just it captures that tone and style. Obviously for a modern audience, it's not just trying to be one of those movies, but it's just taking that little taste and that extra spice from those influences and bringing them into this movie. And it's, as someone who just watched all 4 of those old Fantastic Four movies, it's really nice to watch one that's actually doing it. It's very much like watching The Batman and being like, finally, someone fucking made an actual Batman movie. There were other good Batman movies, but this is like a proper fucking Batman movie. And that's very much what this feels like. This is like a proper Fantastic Four movie that's working in the right genre space, that's working on the right tone. And I think the moment when you get that is them going out into space and all that stuff. It's just really, really nice.
Absolutely, and that they rip that Band-Aid off so early. It's one of the first big things they do in the movie, so that like anything else they do in the future of this universe, you've already established that this is who they are and this is the kind of thing they do. It's hard to imagine the Tim Story versions of these characters just hopping on a spaceship and going out to explore, right? Like that's just not what they, even though those movies, I guess, technically open with them going to space, it doesn't feel like a core part of their characters that they would do that. But these are adventurers and sci-fi adventurers, and you get that. And then I do think the scene where they are escaping the Silver Surfer and they're going at like their sub-light speed travel that's kind of like warp from Star Trek or something, and they then get around that black hole, and there's this scene that like clearly inspired by one of the scenes in Interstellar where a similar thing happens around a black hole, but like done in this movie's own way is really cool. They're also using like basically the version of the black hole that we saw in the photograph NASA released a couple of years ago, which was cool to see on screen, because I don't think there's been a lot of movies involving black holes that have come since we've had that like literal visual confirmation of what they look like. So that was really neat. And it's the kind of proper action sequence you actually don't see much from Marvel, where there's like a dozen things going on. You've got the Thing piloting, Johnny's helping him, Sue is going into birth, Reed is trying to do 5 different things at once because he's trying to figure out how they're going to get away and doing the calculations in his head, and obviously also trying to help his wife. And the Silver Surfer is fucking shit up, and they've got Sue, while she is having contractions, having to make the ship invisible. Like, it's such a great, let's just pile up, because the best action scenes do this. You pile on a million challenges for the characters, and having that, like, to the point where, like, them being almost sucked into a black hole at a certain point is an afterthought of how many things they're dealing with, and it being the emotional high point of the movie, because it's when Franklin is born. It's one of the best action sequences or set pieces, whatever you want to call it, that any Marvel movie has ever done. And I was kind of shocked that they were able to pull off something like that, because it's been a long time since I think Marvel had something that ambitious in one of their movies, and it was just really cool to see.
Yeah, it's just so well done. Like the effects of it and the set, the spaceship and all that, like the zero G stuff is all super well done. There's so many just like really great creative moments. Like I love that, Johnny is there having to shoot the Silver Surfer. I love that Invisible Woman's like, it's like, kill her. It's like, what, really? It's like, she's trying to take your nephew, fucking kill her. She doesn't always say fucking, but if it was an R-rated movie, she would say, just fucking kill her, Johnny. And he's shooting at her with the fucking turret, and I love that it's getting bent because they're in warped space, and so he shoots the thing fucking sideways, and it like a fucking old arcade game, like Pac-Man. It's just like, coming out of the screen and from the other end, but it's like warping around and goes in a circle around the tunnel, and fucking nails the Silver Surfer. Like, there's just so many really killer moments like that. It's really just, it's just a very spectacular sequence. And it's where, like, I think we probably both agree that Superman is overall a better movie than this, and it has like that bigger ambition. But to give this movie credit, I don't think there's an action scene in Superman as good as this whole sequence is in Fantastic Four.
Yeah, I think I probably agree, and I think and see, it's a little tough because Superman it's hard to like pick out sort of discrete action sequences from that at a certain point because of what happens in it. But yeah, I think because the high point for me in Superman, honestly, is probably, in terms of just action, is the scene with Mr. Terrific and Lois is in kind of the bubble. And I think I would, those are a little similar to me because there's a conceptual quality to it, right? It's not just watching something happen. It's that there's all this other stuff kind of going around the edges. But no, I agree. And I think this one makes really good use of all 4 members of the team, of Johnny being at the helm, and Reed having to be kind of the leader, but also the husband, and Sue not just being the woman of the group, but also like the key player in the invisibility and all of that, and having to like bear the weight of all this, and Johnny getting to basically do the Luke role from Star Wars: A New Hope, where he like gets in the hot seat and is firing, but then there's this extra twist, you say. Yeah, no, that scene is definitely dynamite, and definitely like I remember vividly having a thought halfway through that scene where I went, I'm so fucking bummed we have to go back to the Russo brothers after this, because Matt Shakman, he's so good at this. Like, he's genuinely like, Matt Shakman and the Russo brothers come from a similar cloth in that they are TV directors, and they were originally TV comedy directors. But I think when you look at their work since they stopped doing TV comedies, Matt Shakman is just so manifestly better at like action and aesthetics and all of the big stuff. He had impressive episodes of Game of Thrones. He did WandaVision, which you and I have script issues with WandaVision, but directorially, that show is beyond reproach. Really well done. And I think this movie is pretty much as well. And like, one of the many reasons I'm a little wary of the new Avengers movies is going back to the fucking concrete slab aesthetic of the Russo brothers after this will feel like a big downgrade.
Yes, but but within this movie, it's like that sequence, it's truly masterful. Like, it's one of the best like big action sequences I've seen in a while, particularly from a superhero movie.
Oh yeah, definitely for a superhero movie, this is up there. And yeah, just really fun stuff. So yeah, this is an interesting movie because I do think I would feel a lot less critical of the things we're critical about with this movie if Marvel were just in a different place. It is the larger context of the problems Marvel has had in recent years, where they're going in the future, the fact that it's very unclear to me what will happen next with these characters and what they're able to do. Like, that sours me, because like, let's be clear, Marvel really needed this to be great, and I think it's just short enough of great that I worry about where they're going to go with it. But as its own movie, It's very fun. I really enjoyed my time with it. And the little things that it does less well are disappointing in part because I like what it is doing well so much.
Yeah. I mean, I think if it's something where if this movie came out in like 2012 or something, and it was like and it was like part of like the height of Marvel and like that kind of big wave, I think it would be like it would be a phenomenal superhero movie within that group. Not the best Marvel movie, but it's like, if you're comparing it to like the other Iron Man movies, you're comparing it to the Thor movies, generally speaking, I think Ragnarok's better than this, but it's better than any of the other Thor movies besides Ragnarok. Like if you're looking at it in that company, it's really good.
I think if we're talking about the Phase 1 movies, Iron Man 2, Incredible Hulk, Thor, Captain America 1, I think it's better than any of those.
Yes.
Like I think Avengers at the end of Phase 1 is better than this. But like I think as a start, like this is better than those. I think it's better than Doctor Strange, Spider-Man Homecoming, like a lot of their like starting out the story movies. I think, this is not at the level of like a Black Panther or Thor Ragnarok, but Black Panther did have the benefit of that character being introduced in Civil War, and Thor Ragnarok, while kind of a soft reboot, was the third movie in the series, so it got to hit the ground running. So it is impressive. I honestly, my other thought I kept wishing is that, like, boy, this should just wipe the MCU slate clean and let this be the first. Like, this would be so exciting in the way that Superman is so exciting because it's a fresh start. This is a new DCU. It's got no baggage. And they don't immediately have like 5 team-up movies planned. That's part of what makes that movie feel so exciting, is that it doesn't come with all this baggage. This movie, if this were in that position where like they said, this is the new MCU and Fantastic Four is basically the same thing Iron Man 1 was back in 2008, I'd be like, fuck yeah, this is a great start. But then the movie ends, it's like the Fantastic Four will return in Avengers Doomsday, and I'm like, so we get to watch them interact with the Thunderbolts and the new Captain America and the Eternals? I don't care. I do not care. I don't want to see any of those characters again, really. Maybe Anthony Mackie Captain America if they can give him a better movie. But like other than that, it's been a disaster. So like, why do I care?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you that, it's, and honestly, like, I didn't even really have all that much of that feeling for Superman of like, I'm not like committed to, and I gotta go see Supergirl. Like, if it gets good reviews, maybe I'll see it, but because for me personally, I'm just like very superhero movied out. I'd much rather have something there's only so many live action superhero movies I can see.
Yeah. But Superman doesn't end with the weight of like, and now Justice League, right? Like that would exhaust you. Superman doesn't ask more of your time in the way this kind of ends gesturing in that direction. So, because they're also bringing back all the Fox X-Men and stuff. And it's just like, guys, you have this great fresh start. Please take yes for an answer. Please. Like, it's okay. Oh man, I don't know. That's where
like I would be interested in seeing like takes of other Marvel heroes in this 60s retro futuristic world,
Yeah.
Like I would if that was like the thing that they were doing. Again, like I'm just, for me, I'm never going to be in the position again of, and I'm going to see all these. Right. That has been thoroughly beaten out of me. Like we're going to, at some point we'll get to the point where there's more I have not seen than I have, at the point that we're now at fucking 37. But obviously I still love a lot of the source material. Like I would like to see good movies with these characters. But I just like, don't have all that much of an interest in the idea of the cinematic universe stuff at this point. But I could see a like, old school takes on other Marvel heroes existing in this world would be an interesting thing to see. But obviously that's not really the direction they're going in. And like they say like, there'll be an Avengers Doomsday. I'm like, maybe I'll see it. I don't know. Obviously who knows what the fuck that movie actually is. I don't think Marvel probably really even knows what that movie is.
I mean, they're shooting it. I hope they know. But, here's the thing with Doomsday. I'm interested in seeing the Fantastic Four again because I like them. And I am interested in what Robert Downey Jr. is going to do because I think that could be a terrible idea. I think it could also be cool if they do it the right way. So we will see. But, all the other stuff, like, guys, I've been watching the other stuff. I don't ever want to see the Thunderbolts again. I don't care if you call them the New Avengers. Doesn't make me care. I haven't, I would love to see Shang-Chi again, but you guys seem to have forgotten he exists. Yeah. So that's not happening. I don't really need any more Tom Holland Spider-Man in my life. All of that stuff is just like, and this is exciting. And like, yeah, imagine, Sean, if like they said, next we're doing a couple more Earth 828 movies, and we're going to do Hank Pym Ant-Man, but in this setting. Oh, that'd be fucking cool, right?
Yeah.
Or, there's all sorts of heroes you could do in this setting, and maybe takes on characters that we haven't gotten before. But Avengers Doomsday, and then Avengers Secret Wars, and yay.
And then probably that will be the point where they actually do a reboot if they're doing, or like a soft reboot or whatever if they're doing Secret Wars. Which, yeah, I've made this comment before. Like, this comment itself is old, is how long we've been this year of superhero movies. But it is still fascinating to me just to have gone on this arc with superhero movies that I went on with superhero comic books. It's like, I read a bunch of them as a kid, and particularly I read a bunch of the old ones. I'm like, God, this is so cool. These comic books are so awesome. And then I started reading more modern ones. This is around the original Marvel Civil War events in like the mid-2000s, that very loosely adapted in the Captain America Civil War movie. And getting to the point of realizing, like, oh God, it's just like the continuity is so convoluted. It's just every other month seems to lead into some other giant fucking weird crossover event, whether you're DC or Marvel, that are all basically the same fucking thing, and just the death spiral narratively that occurs there. And it's just so fascinating to have gone on in my life the same arc with these superhero movies, where you have like Iron Man and Thor and Captain America. I'm like, yeah, these movies are awesome, like cool, and they've got some crossovers. That's awesome. And then eventually it just gets to the point where like, okay, guys, fucking slow down. Like, you've gone so far off the deep end, and like the crossovers have gone too far. You're now like mining your own self for nostalgia within your own continuity that you're now changing with the multiverse into this and that, and it's just. Yeah, like, it is frustrating to have seen it get run into the ground in the way that it did kind of immediately post Avengers Endgame. Like, it's just so clear that they just needed to stop after Endgame for a while and then make this movie or whatever. But it's just it just got so too much, and I do just have like an exhaustion around these kinds of movies. That I enjoyed this movie a lot, but this movie can't like relieve that. It can't. Even if it is a really, really fun and really good movie, it can't make me excited to see the other movies. Like, I'm just like, they have beaten that kind of excitement for the future for other projects out of me. It is just totally, for me personally, I will take each project on its own basis and ignore the fact that there is a larger continuity that they're supposedly working towards.
I think it's a healthy thing to do, and I think the other question here is also, what will the state of the film business allow of these movies in the future? Because I think another part of the story that's interesting to me is, so we have the numbers for the weekend now as we're recording this, and Fantastic Four opened to 118 million domestically, which is great for a Fantastic Four movie. Like, none of the others came close to that. Like, that's, I think, more than the lifetime gross of Fantastic. So, like, big opening for Fantastic Four. It's just under Superman's opening, which was 125 million. Both of those are very, very healthy openings. It does look like in both cases the international box office is softer, and in general, box office has been softer this year. Like, and other than Lilo and Stitch, which somehow made $1 billion, that movie just, I don't know what happened with Lilo and Stitch. But other than that, American movies have kind of hit a ceiling that is less the billion plus marker we were seeing for a while there, and more in the like $600-700 million marker. And that sounds like it should be a problem because it's a lot of money, but they're spending a lot of money on these movies. And so I do kind of wonder where things go if we're entering a market where these kinds of mega blockbusters, like, Avatar is going to do it again because it does it every time. That trailer was good. Anyway, Avatar Fire and Ash is coming out this year. That's going to be big. But like, I don't think Marvel and DC can trust that they're going to regularly have billion-dollar movies. And so that creates question marks for them because they're going to have to figure out the budget situation, because you can't be making spending the money you're spending if the box office is a little depressed. And again, good for these movies, because again, Superman had never opened that big. Fantastic Four obviously had never opened that big. This is good in a vacuum, but we're not in a vacuum. We're in a larger context where I think there's questions around the long-term viability of the entire kind of blockbuster model as it has existed for the last 10-15 years.
Yeah, but yeah, because it's just like, it's so clear that at the very least, for superhero movies specifically, and obviously I think, the box office more broadly speaking, but for superhero movies specifically, we're just not in the situation where you can put out a fucking Aquaman movie and make $1 billion somehow, you know? It's like, you know, like there was this window in time where it just was fucking crazy, and these like, you know, so many superhero movies were just making insane quantities of money. And it's like that fervor I don't think is going to come back anytime soon. Like, I don't think within these kinds of projects is that fervor going to come back. And so, yeah, I think like the question then becomes, what do they do as these companies, where I think, you know, in a more rational world, you would just say like, oh, well, you know, it's fine. Like they don't have to be giant, crazy, super big budget movies. You know, most of these properties you could make much cheaper and you'd make plenty of money on, but there's always that specter of, the money people being like, but we need to make more money than we were making before. We need to keep that fucking line going up even further. And if superhero movies aren't going to do it, then we got to get those video game adaptations. Like, did you see The Last of Us? Did you see the Mario movie? We got to do there. That's what it is. That's the wave, you know? It makes me curious what's going to happen around that kind of stuff. Where it's like, where a superhero movie is going to fit in that larger kind of context of what the modern box office is, and what are they going to try to plant their flag to try to relive the glorious past of, you can put out some whatever fucking random thing and make $1 billion on it.
Sadly, the lesson of 2025 so far is that the two most unmitigated successes of the year from America have been, the three most unmitigated successes have been the Lilo and Stitch remake, the How to Train Your Dragon remake, and Jurassic Park 7. So that's where we're going, Sean. That's where we're going.
Great. I can't wait for them to make a remake of The Lion King. You know, I think it's time. I think, people say it's too soon. I don't think it's too soon.
Sean, what if they just put 1994 original Lion King in theaters and presented it as a brand new movie, said this is a remake of that movie from 2018 y'all loved, in a new animation style, and just be bold-faced, dare anyone to call you out on it? I bet they'd make $1 billion.
Or, it's like, maybe The Lion King's a bit too famous. They should do that for, like, movies that, like, the kids don't know. Like, put fucking Psycho out. Like, nobody under 30 knows what Psycho is. Just fucking put it in the movie theaters and pretend it's a new movie. And the fucking, Gen Z will just go see it and be like, oh my god, this movie's so fucking hardcore. Holy shit.
What kind of shower TikTok challenge would that create, Sean?
It's like, everyone would be buying all the fucking chocolate syrup. And, it's like, how good is the black and white filter on TikTok?
All right, we've run out of things to talk about. We will be back next month, probably with our standard 2 episodes. We did 3 this month because we had 2 big superhero movies, and that was exciting. But now we will go back to talking about other things in the month of August. We actually haven't decided on the topic yet. We'll get back to you on that one.
Yes, because we have to get back to you on the topic, and in August, I have to get back to work.